Hey, this is Dominic, and this is your home for the cutting-edge conversations on optimizing your personal performance, lighting up your sex life, and living a purpose-driven life of your own design.
These are the topics that Dominic and I have both struggled with in our own lives and still don't always get right. This is Brian. Welcome to the Great Man Podcast.
Fellas, I've got an exciting announcement to make about the upcoming Masterclass on Designing the Next Year of Your Life 2022 edition that I've been teasing for the last 4 weeks. That registration link is finally live. You can officially register for it, and the link is at the top of the show notes. So you can press pause on this right now and register for it. If you haven't heard about it, on Wednesday, November 17th from 7 to 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time, I'm going to be running a 90-minute masterclass on how to look forward to design the next year of your life. And if you've been enjoying these episodes that we've done on building your best self, this is our 5th week, our 5th installment, then you're not going to want to miss that masterclass. And another surprise bonus for you is all of the members of the 3 Great Man Masterminds are going to be in attendance for that. I've actually aligned all of our masterminds to be on that one night. So you guys get a chance to mix it up with some of the men from the masterminds that you've heard interviewed on this podcast. Brian will be there. A bunch of other guys, some of your favorites will be there as well. And it'll give you a chance to go through a process with them. So it'll be a really exciting night. Again, it's Design the Next Year of Your Life, 2022, 90-minute masterclass. Link and description in the show notes. Welcome to week number 5 of the Building Your Best Self series, a 13-episode mini adventure to call forth your best self as you head into 2022. Now, most of our efforts to change our behaviors to go after what we want in life fail. They fail not because we lack motivation, but because changing our behaviors is like swimming upstream. It's the wrong place to start. We must first start with changing our identity. You see, your identity, who you believe yourself to be, is the single biggest driver of your actions, your habits, the goals you set, the relationships you enter, how you feel about yourself, and what you believe yourself capable of. So the question then becomes, and this is a really important one, how much of your identity have you consciously chosen? And how much of it has evolved unconsciously? James Clear, author of Atomic Habits, who writes brilliantly about identity and habits and the relation between the two, may have a clue for us. He breaks down the Latin root of the word identity, and he says, identity was originally derived from the Latin words essentitas, which means being, and identidem, which means repeatedly. So your identity, quite literally, is your repeated beingness. Now, hang with me here, guys. Said differently, the repetition of your thoughts over the course of time, the repetition of all your actions over time, the proof and the evidence you've collected along the way about who you are and what you're capable of forms your identity and your belief systems about yourself, right? Logically, that would make sense. But here's the linchpin. All of those things are rooted in the past. So your present day identity, and this is kind of like the punchline, your present day identity is much more an artifact of the past than it is a conscious creation of the future. Do you get that? Those repeated thoughts, actions, outcomes all happened in the past. And many times those outcomes are not what you desire. And therefore, if you want something different, it requires creating someone different for the future. So it begs the question, from this point forward, who is the man you are determined to becoming, and what are the daily actions you will take to bring that man into being? That's what this entire episode around identity is about. So in this episode, we're going to talk about why most behavior change simply doesn't stick. Why you need to decide who you want to become and then relentlessly cast votes, which are aligned actions, for the man you want to become every single day. Why you should stop focusing on all the evidence and proof that you've accumulated about your abilities up to this point. Withdraw your attention from all of that and instead focus on who you want to become. Dawn of a new day. We'll talk about James Clear, very simple 2-step process to changing your identity. And then to end it, a 3-step takeaway process to illuminate where identity conflict may be preventing you from sustained behavior change. Enjoy this episode today on Building Your Best Self, episode number 5, Identity. So we've been getting a lot of really positive feedback on the first 4 episodes that we've done in this Building Your Best Self for 2022 series, Bri. The guys in the Facebook group are saying they really love the focused discussions, really around just working through some of the stuff that are keeping them from going to that next level. And I'm curious for you, in our first 4 discussions, which we've had about 5 questions every man must ask himself about his life, greatest energy, time, and then last week's episode was around turning pro. Which one of those conversations has been the standout for you personally?
Yeah, I think we've been doing this. What are we on 2.5 years now, Dom, of recording podcasts in this realm?
Like really coming up on 3.
Close to 3, right?
Yeah.
And I feel to a certain extent, every episode plays in the periphery of this core conversation that we're having. And so it's hard. It's hard to pick like, well, which is the best one? I think I would answer that with like, where do you start? And I think around turning pro, like that was great. I read that for the first time and just finished it. And that was great and new information in a different way. But I think the topic for today is probably where I would start.
Ah, interesting. Okay, good. Well, maybe next time we do this, we should make this episode number 1 instead of episode number 5 in the series, if this is where Brian Stacy would start. But I'm with you, man. The reason why men come to do work with us in the masterminds or because they're listening to the podcast is because they want something in their lives that they're not currently getting. That's really kind of quite simple, right? It's either I want that next level in my life, right? And I know that next level is calling. I don't know how to get at it. Or I want to step it up in my career, step it up in my relationship, step it up in the bedroom. Like every guy here wants some different outcome, some different behavior in their life. And what we have come to learn is that oftentimes the reason why the behavior change that we seek doesn't stick, and the reason why the outcomes that we seek don't materialize in our lives is because we've started in the wrong place. And we start by trying to change our behaviors instead of starting in the place that's most crucial, which is our conversation today, which is around changing your identity. I would say that James Clear, he of Atomic Habits fame, has done the best articulation of how oftentimes our identity conflict is what stands in the way of behavior change. And we're going to break down some of his quotes that help to really illuminate like how that comes into being.
I love this. And Dominic, I have a feeling that you and I are going to come from different perspectives on this. And so like, I have a quick question for you. Let's hit it off the bat. Identity. Is this an internal thing or an external thing? Is this who people think I am, or is this who Brian thinks Brian is?
Ah, great question. So that's a really profound question. The first question asked before that is how much of your identity have you consciously chosen and how much of your identity has been unconscious? And the answer to your question is in that second piece of how much of your identity is unconscious. James Clear says this. He goes, we come into this world as babies without any formed identity. Like we're, a blank slate identity-wise. And we end up absorbing other people's expectations of us, societal expectations of us, and also intermixed in there is our own expectations of us, our own self-perception. But depending on how loud those different voices were, that's the composition of who you come to believe you are and what you come to believe about yourself and what you're capable of. For the purposes of our discussion today, it's only about what you believe yourself to be, who you desire to be. And we want to unhook from everything that anyone else has ever thought you are, how they respond to you, because that's irrelevant. What we want to go is to the core of your being and help you to get clear on who am I in here? And most people can't answer that question.
Yeah. And growing up, having these expectations or identities kind of thrown upon us, it's oftentimes not our choice. I was just with a good friend of mine, Andrew Walker, and we were talking about growing up, even in high school, and he played soccer and basketball. And I said, how did you find those sports? Were you like, hey, like I want to do this thing, like I love soccer? Or was this somebody else? He said, no. He said that my dad like really liked soccer. And so we'd watch it together. And he was like pushing me to be good in soccer. And he's like, and I was okay in soccer. He's like, but basketball I loved. Like I just picked that up on my own. My dad never played it. He's like, and I just loved it and still do to this day. And so we were talking through like, what did he believe about himself growing up? And he's like, I believed that I was a good basketball player because I was the first in my generation or first in my family to do this. So like that was part of his identity.
Bingo. For our listeners, if you think about even just what was expected of you as a child in the household, right? Were you the good student? Were you the one who behaved? Were you the unruly one? In your household, to become successful, did you have to become a doctor or a lawyer? Like these, otherwise any other profession, you disappoint the family. Like all of these have like a massive impact on your identity. And I've been having some deeper conversations with the men of color in our communities who have grown up here in this country and who have navigated many white spaces. The racial identity, in many cases being outsidered and othered, and their cultures being made to be weird and having to hide it. These kinds of things all have a profound impact on identity that weren't necessarily chosen. These things were not chosen consciously. They just kind of happened. And I think this is where, it's really important to understand the root of identity. I mentioned this in the introduction, and I'm going to reiterate it again because it's this important. James Clear, he said that the root of the word identity literally comes from the Latin words essentitas, which means being, and identitem, which means repeatedly. So your identity literally translates to your repeated state of beingness. What does that mean? Your repetition of thoughts, then your repetition of actions, your repetitions of beliefs, and then the repetition of proof and evidence that you have in your life all come to this place of repeated being that forms your identity. Okay. But here's the implication of that. Everything I just mentioned is all rooted in the past. You have to understand this. Your repeated thoughts, all were past driven. Your repeated actions all have happened in the past. All of the evidence you've accumulated in your life about whether you're going to be lucky in love or the world's going to, conspire in your favor or not, whether you're going to be financially successful, all of that evidence, all of that proof is rooted in the past. It is not a conscious creation of who you desire to be in the future.
But it's easy, Don, to look at this and say like, okay, cool. Like Michael Jordan, he's a basketball player. He probably thinks he's a basketball player. Like, because he has a ton of evidence that says that he was, some may argue, the best basketball player of all time.
As a Chicago Bulls fan, I would expect you to argue that.
So looking at the past seems pretty bulletproof, right, when it comes to identities. So I'm not quite sure I understand I assume you're going to say like I have to look forward with the identity or look into the future with the identity.
Great. All that evidence, everything that you've accumulated up to this point, it's relevant, no question. But now start to think about the limiting identities that you have about yourself. Like you want something other than, we've had Mordecai Weiner and Mike DeCourcy come on this podcast, guys who have struggled with their weight their entire lives. They've seen themselves as being the overweight guy. They don't want to be the overweight guy anymore, but they have all sorts of evidence that they failed at diets and that they're always going to be the overweight guy. They made an identity shift internally to say, I'm going to be the man who's healthy, who has control over this. There was no evidence to support that leading up to that, but they made an identity shift. They made a choice internally to say, I don't want to be this guy anymore. Other people who are saying, man, I've never made the money I want to. I've always felt money is always going to be outside of my reach. You have plenty of evidence, but you don't want that to define your life anymore. Then what do you do with that? You cannot be an indentured servant anymore to the evidence of the past. And I'll give you a real personal example, right? This is one that happened recently. 5 months ago or so, I kind of looked at my life and I said, for 5 years, I've been creating lots of stuff. I've been putting out video content. We've done podcasts for 2.5 years at that point. I've written 2 books, done a lot of keynote speeches. And my identity was, I'm a good, but I'm not a great creator. That's the unconscious story I allowed to take root.
How did you find that out? How did you get to like, this is what Dominic believes about himself?
Yeah, like through some self-awareness practice, through some meditation. And I started to look at all the stuff I've created. Nothing ever went viral. nothing's ever exploded and gone crazy. Like our podcast does well. My books did well. Like I've gotten, hired and paid well for keynote speeches, but nothing's ever kind of like hit this transcendent growth or really caught fire. And so I started to look at it. I'm like, oh, I'm just good. I'm not great. And I didn't like that story. I didn't like that. And I wanted something new. And turns out I had this really serendipitous conversation with one of our listeners. His name is Giuseppe. You know Giuseppe's.
Giuseppe the magician.
That's right.
I do know me some Giuseppe.
we do. What's up, Giuseppe? If you're listening to this episode, I'm about to share how you impacted my life forever. Giuseppe said that as a listener of the show, he's like, listen, Dominic, you've got a gift at what you do, but I think you also have more artistic flair that you haven't tapped yet. Like there's a creator that's deeper inside of you that I see that you haven't built a relationship with. And he's like, and I think you should spend some time curating a relationship with that inner artist of yours. And when he said that word artist, I'm like, I never looked at myself like an artist. I'm like, I'm not an artist. I'm just a guy who produces stuff as a thought leader. When I took on this identity of being an artist and one who creates unique, magnificent work that touches the hearts of people, that's like the new identity statement I wrote. Then I started to say, well, now I have a burning desire to become that guy. So what's my plan? So start to notice this. I authored a new identity, a new vision for a man who I wanted to become. I built a burning desire for it. And I'm like, okay, well, what's the plan? Like, how would that person, if I truly am an artist, how does an artist live? So one of the things that I did was I took the book, The Artist's Way, off of my bookshelf. It had been collecting dust. The Artist's Way is a book, a 12-week course on how to create higher levels of creativity, like to break through and find spiritual creativity, which basically just means like, how to find the deepest essence of who you are as a creator. So I committed to a 12-week program every morning where I'm writing for 30 minutes, like journaling, right? To just kind of get to the root of who I am. I stopped. I created space for that creativity to emerge. So stopped doing 2 podcasts a week, did 1. I started systematically removing stuff from my calendar that was cluttering up my ability to actually be creative. I went from 2 emails a week down to 1 email a week, a lot of different changes I made. And over that period of time, Bri, my creativity, my flair for creativity in these deeper places, I was able to tap into. Now, here we are 5 months later. What are the outcomes that I've experienced? In the last 60 days, my Instagram account went from 4,500 followers to 9,000 followers. In 60 days, I've had a 100% increase in my followers on Instagram because the stuff I'm posting is resonant. It took me a year to gain 1,000 followers in the previous year. It took me 60 days to double my followership because of the stuff I'm putting out. This Building Your Best Self series was an idea I had through the morning pages, through the creativity, and it's catching fire. We're getting more downloads on these things. We're getting better feedback around it, right? More men are reaching out about joining the podcast. So now I start to see myself as, oh, I am a man who's an exceptional creator, creating original content, who touches the hearts of people who engage with my work. New identity. And every single day I take an action that's in alignment with that. Is that starting to make sense?
Let me get this straight, because the path that you went down was desire, identity. What would somebody with this artist identity do? Action. And then there's outcomes. And you're like, look, my Instagram, my stories, my this or that. Like, here's the outcomes, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Because I think the other path that I've certainly tried before is, this isn't working. I want something different.
Yes.
Let me do what's different. Let me go make more money. Let me go create something new. And then hopefully outcome. But usually that's where the trail ends. Because the outcome doesn't come. And then my other identity is reinforced. Like, look, I'm a failure. Look, I haven't done anything. Look, whatever. So I think I've taken that path multiple times. But what you're saying is I've got it backwards. It's not actions and then outcomes and then identity. It's not identity's last, identity's first. Put that first.
Exactly. And here's why. Again, this comes back to James Clear's teachings. Let's start with, you said, something's wrong. I want it to change. So I change my actions, right? So let's work with a real life example. Like, what's an example of something where you're like, this isn't working and I want it to change. And you started with the action before the identity.
Right. So there was a time period in my life where I looked back at my relationships, my romantic relationships, and they lasted right around a year, sometimes a little bit more than a year, but definitely no longer than that. And so even going into relationships, I was like, man, like I can hit the clock on day one because by day 365, like this will basically be done. I'll hang on for a little while longer, but it's already done. And I wanted to change that. Maybe I want a real relationship. Like this isn't good.
Great. So you identified the problem is you have a desired outcome, which is a longer relationship, like a lasting relationship, right?
Right.
Cool. And so what was your method for trying to fix that?
I'm going to find the person that I think might last longer than that. And then I'm going to stick it out longer than that. So I can prove to myself that I'm a guy who can have a relationship for longer than 1 year.
Right. Okay. So at the core, at the root of all of that, though, there wasn't an identity shift that said, I am a man who is capable of a long-term relationship. Like you were trying
I just wanted to prove it. I just wanted to prove it.
Right. I wanted to prove it, but like there wasn't a belief that like I can do this. And then
worse than that, I thought I'd probably fail.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, there was
exactly. This is the bottom line is basically if something's not working and you want to take a different action so that you can get a different outcome, but it's in conflict with who you believe yourself to be, that who you believe yourself to be will always win out because it's just stronger, right? So these repeated attempts to change, your ability to stay in a relationship longer, or, like we talked about with DeCourcy and Mordecai, their previous attempts to make changes around better diet habits were always in conflict with the fact that, and using their language, like I'm the fat guy. I can temporarily lose weight. I know how to diet, but ultimately my lot in life is I'm the fat guy.
Like I'm going to yo-yo back. That was a verbatim.
Right. So like you may have temporary success. So once the identity shift comes around, I'm a man who's healthy, who's in control of his decisions. Like I am a guy who's going to be living a vibrant, healthy lifestyle until I'm in my 90s. That's a decision that has to be made, right? Identity shift made, burning desire built, right? I will have this. And then a plan of attack, right? So small actions that show up in alignment with what that guy would do every single day.
Don't you want to know how my relationship went?
Tell us, Bri, how did your relationship go?
It was a fucking disaster. It was a grind. It wasn't much fun, and I guess I didn't last longer than a year. So,
but now,
and it's funny, right? Because I after that relationship, and this is, I think, why this topic is so important right now is because there's other ways to do this. They just take a lot longer and they're a lot harder. So if you're someone that's feeling slow, like life is moving really fast and you can't quite grasp it, which I have certainly felt before and did feel in this relationship game, I went through the gauntlet and the relationship didn't last that long. And I learned a lot. I learned a lot in that relationship, but it took another 9 months to then say like, okay, like maybe I overcorrected. Maybe the goal shouldn't be, let's just stick this thing out so that it's longer. What do I really want?
Right.
And so then when I said like, what is really important to me, I literally got on my whiteboard and I was like, this is what I want in a relationship. This is what didn't work in this one. And I sat in that. I was like, now I can identify like what's really important to me in a relationship. And so then the identity for me was someone that I am someone that can see what's a good fit for me and see when it's a not good fit for me.
There you go.
And I'm going to stay true to who I am in a relationship. And I've never even said those words before, Dom, but by going through those activities, like that is what I truly believed because I'd been through the gauntlet enough at that point to say like, hey, something's just got to change here.
Great. I'm so glad you said that. And yeah, you got to the place you wanted to. It probably took longer. You went through more hell than you needed to. And hey, you're in the beautiful relationship. So it all worked out amazingly. And there's a quicker line in other places of your life, right? It doesn't necessarily be in relationships, but around money or around like your mental health or your physical well-being. There's a quicker line. And a lot of it goes through this place of identity. And I want to read a transcript from James Clear. There's an audio clip. It's less than 3 minutes long that I have linked in the show notes, that his interview on London Real was powerful. And he said, my question is, how do we come to believe things about ourselves? Because when you come into the world as a baby, you don't have any preset beliefs or notions. how does this internal story that we tell ourselves, our identity, become shaped and formed? And I came to realize that it's mostly through the repetition of story. What you come to realize is that your habits reinforce a particular identity about yourself. Sometimes this can be positive and sometimes this can be negative. The story could be things like, I'm bad at math. I'm terrible at remembering people's names. I'm not good at remembering directions. That's just an internal story you tell yourself, but each time you have an experience that reinforces that, the story gets solidified. And this is the stuff that we've been talking about. But the takeaway here is that every action you take is kind of like a vote for the type of person you want to become. This is huge. And if you can master the right actions, if you can master the right habits, then you start to cast votes for this new identity, this desired person you want to be. I think it's one of the reasons why small habits matter so much. They don't necessarily transform your life overnight. Doing one push-up doesn't transform your body, but it does cast a vote for a person who doesn't miss workouts. Meditating for 1 minute might not give you an immediate sense of calm in your life, but that does cast a vote for becoming a meditator. The real goal is not to run a marathon, but to become a runner. The real goal is not to write a book. The goal is to become a writer. Once you've adopted that identity, you're really not even pursuing behavior change anymore. Another key point here. Once you've adopted that identity, you're not really even pursuing behavior change anymore. You're just acting in alignment with the kind of person you see yourself to be. It's kind of like true behavior change is really identity change. Because once you've changed that internal story, it's way easier for you to show up every day. And you're no longer needing to motivate yourself to do it. You're just saying, this is who I am now.
Yeah, it becomes automatic. A great example here, he used the example of a marathon, and one of my aunts had in her cabinet, she was not a runner, not even in shape. And she said, I'm a runner. She put a little notepad together, put it on her cabinets and said, like, I am a runner. And she said over a period, when she would look at that, she'd be like, what does a runner do? Runners run. It's a really simple one, really straightforward one, runners run, right? So when she would see that, she'd be like, did I or did I not run today? Now, she didn't get in shape really fast. She didn't run a marathon really fast. But like that vote, every single time she saw that, she's like, I'm going to take the action that does what a runner does, which is run. I'm going to go for a run, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever it may be. But she would do that. And so she slowly started to build that up. She did end up running a marathon after that.
Boom.
For her, it was really simple. And she said before that, she had tried getting onto programs and like marathon type running programs, and she would get hurt or do this or do that. And she said this was a completely different thing because it gave her the freedom and flexibility to be automatic, to just say like, oh, like this is obvious. Like this is runners run. So I'm going to go run.
Yeah, it's that simple. That just reminds me of another story, about Jerry Seinfeld. Someone asked Jerry Seinfeld the secret to his success. He's like, listen, if you want to be a great comedian, you have to write great jokes. And the secret to writing great jokes is you have to write a lot. And so, early on in his career, before anyone knew who he was, he said, I'm going to learn how to write great jokes, which means every single day I have to write. That's what, great comedians do. This ties back to this idea of, the outcomes are always the lagging indicator of that identity shift and those behavior changes. So the way that he started to bring action into his daily life was every day that he wrote for 15 minutes. Each day that he wrote for 15 minutes, he went onto his calendar and put a big X on the calendar to mark that he had done that. And then as he started to accumulate a number of days, these were all votes, right? Votes for him becoming a great writer. Then he noticed he had like a week's worth of X's lined up. And then it became a month worth of X's. And he got the early payoff of seeing that accumulation of, the chain of X's. That payoff came long before his jokes became any good, right? And that's one way of bringing that payoff into the present moment. And for me, when I was doing The Artist's Way, it's a 12-week program, Brian. That's 84 fucking days of sitting down and writing morning pages when you don't want to, when shit's coming out. It's boring. It's repetitive. I wasn't feeling any more creative. But when I started to see, I'm on day 30. Wow, I'm proud of myself. Look at this black composition book. It's almost finished. Now I get to pull out a new black composition. Like the sense of accomplishment. And ultimately, we know how Jerry Seinfeld's story ended up, right? Is like he learned how to write great comedy and did it over and over and over again. So James Clear really simplifies, how to change your identity and get all the behavior change that you are looking for. And he says it's a two-step process to behavior change. Number one, decide the person you want to be. Number two, prove it to yourself with small wins every day, right? Jerry Seinfeld says, I'm going to be a great comedian. Proved it to himself every day by writing at least 15 minutes worth of material.
These seem like simple things too, right? Like the 15 minutes, you're doing the artist way, which is like a tried and true path. I think sometimes I get complicated with this and I'm like, okay, cool. Like I am an entrepreneur, which means I need to start 3 businesses and it gets really complicated really quick. So what does he say about the simplicity of these actions?
He's got a great quote about this. He says, most people think they lack motivation, which is the thing that's missing for their change. He says what's actually missing is lack of clarity around your plan. And Tony Robbins says complexity is the enemy of execution, right? So put this all together. It's not your lack of motivation. Chances are you have a desire. I'm not going to call it a burning desire. Desire is different than a burning desire. A desire is, man, that'd be nice to have it. A burning desire is, I must have it. And the difference between the two is extraordinary. It's like there's a Grand Canyon sized gap between those two. Yeah, it'd be cool to have that versus I must have that. James Clear has another study. I don't know if I'm going to get this right, but the bottom line was there's 3 test groups around people who wanted to learn how to build a workout routine. The first 2 groups with really complicated programs failed. And the one group who just really had a simple thing of show up for 10 minutes of exercise every day, 90% of them finished, after that month, right? So it was just a very clear, concise plan. And that's why, when he says, just meditate 1 minute a day. Corey Muscara, our buddy, says the same thing. Meditate 1 minute a day, up it to 2 minutes a day. You're casting votes for the man or the meditator that you want to become. And here's the deal. When enough of those votes pile up, they become bigger than the pile of evidence from the beginning part of your life, right? Or even if they're not bigger, they capture your attention more, right? The votes are capturing more of your attention than the story of, I can't sit still and meditate, or, I'm the fat guy, all these other stories. Here's an awesome story that happened last night in the Digital Mastermind. We're on a 90-day journey around this concept of identity, and some guys are making really big shifts. And I sent a call out to the guys. I said, hey, who wants some extra coaching right now, tonight, in front of the rest of the group on letting go of an old identity? There was a number of men who stepped forward, but the man who we picked, who has given me not only permission to share this story, but to share his name because he said, I don't want to be Rick on the podcast.
For listeners that don't know who Rick is the pseudonym for anybody that we're telling a story about that we don't want to disclose their identity or their name, I guess. I shouldn't say identity in that regard for this podcast, but their name. And so it sounds like this is not a Rick. This is a real
This
human.
is Dan. And this was super courageous. Here's the message that he sent to me, which was okay, we got to bring Dan in. He goes, I would say that my old identity is one that I cannot seem to succeed in business. So Dan is a coach and he uses hypnosis in his coaching, and he's very well regarded. He's coached a lot of the men in our mastermind. He's done hypnosis with a lot of men and created some extraordinary change for them. But financially, he hasn't figured out his rhythm, his business model. He hasn't figured that out. So he says, I think I have what it takes to be successful in my country and internationally as well, but there's something standing in the way. And he goes, I started sweating as I typed this. So it suggests that there's some part of me that really is resisting this and needs to address it. Right?
Good indicator. Right.
So when he stepped forward in front of this group, and I think we had about 20 men on our call last night, he courageously just shared a story that he'd never shared with anyone other than his wife. So he's a husband, a couple of kids. I think they're younger. And he came forward and was like, listen, this is really rough for me to share this in front of a group of guys because, you guys know me as a coach. I've worked with a number of you guys, but financially, I've never figured out how to make it work, right? I haven't had this business model and that's figured out how to catch fire. And I feel like I'm a failure. This is my first time sharing it in front of any group of people. And so I just needed to get this over with because I just need you guys to tell me how big of a failure I am. And it was this amazingly powerful moment, Bri, that he was carrying this story inside of him that was so deeply rooted in shame. Shame of I'm not enough. Shame of maybe I'm not worthy of this, which is why I don't have it. Shame of not being the man he wants to be in the family to provide, right? Feeling like less than a man. He said, sometimes I feel like less of a man. It affects the polarity in his relationship, all this stuff. And he thought that it would just be a relief to tell everybody so he could just get it over with and be ashamed.
So just to be clear on this, Dominic, he was expecting for there to be crickets. They'd be like, oh, like, sorry, failure guy. Like, that sucks to be you. That's kind of what he was expecting. Okay, got it.
Yeah. And the opposite thing happened. We had 4 of the men in the group who have worked with him step forward and just like spoke about the life-changing moments that they've had as a result of his coaching and how much they love and respect this man, like using words like, I love you. I said to the rest of the men in the group, I'm like, listen, only raise your hand if this is true. Do not feel any pressure to raise your hand. But how many of you men trust Dan more by hearing him share this openly? And every single guy raised their hand. What ended up happening was we spent about 30 minutes just on working through where some of these beliefs came from, and there was a lot of money scarcity around his family, these beliefs that if I have money, it's taking from someone else. As he was even hearing the praise and compliments from the men in the room, I was asking him, how are you receiving this? And he goes, it's overwhelming. It's really hard to receive it. Because in my head, I feel like I'm taking up too much space. I'm taking up too much time. And so only a percentage of what was given to him was coming in, but then eventually more was let in and he started crying and release was happening. And the shame that he'd felt about carrying the story started dissolving. And what ended up happening was he started to come up with a new identity for himself, right? An identity of a man that is financially successful. A man that is learning from other men in our group, right? There were other men in our group who were like, I asked guys, like, who are the men in here who have figured out money, right? That he could talk to. 5 guys raised their hands. And so I'm a man who's learning from other men about how to build business models, about how to save, about, right? How to command money that I'm worth, right? So like, what are the actions that a man who's great with money takes? So he's in the process now. His takeaway is to write a new identity statement and share that with us as a group, to have one-on-ones with these other guys, right? To learn the best practices, to be held to a new standard. And this goes back to, dude, why we're such proponents of not lone wolfing. He lone wolfed and carried this baggage of shame for fucking decades. And he finally had a chance for it to be witnessed. And instead of being shamed, like, was it Cersei, in Game of Thrones, the shame walk?
Shame, right.
He was met with love and praise and restored trust, or actually elevated trust. And today, when I followed up with him, he's like, dude, this was nothing short of revolutionary for me. The support, and now this new identity I can craft with a lot of energy, and I'm going to take new actions. That's how this whole thing comes together.
I love that story about him creating the new identity. And I'll be so curious to hear where this story goes. Not because I'm looking for evidence of him being financially savvy guy, but I am curious around the simplicity of the plan of like, what are those things that he's going to do? Because, right, being well off financially is a big thing. It's not just running, right? It's not just like, I'm a runner. So I'll be really curious to see where he zeroes in on that.
Yeah, some of the takeaways are he's starting to read The Soul of Money by Lynn Twist. He's going to be listening to the Choose FI podcast, which we're obviously big fans of. Brad Barrett's in our mastermind. He's talking to the guys in our group who have figured out money like every day, a little action. And once those votes, right, those votes accumulate, that'll be the man he becomes.
Yeah, these seem like actions that a guy that is financially savvy would do.
So let's wrap this up and summarize the key points here. If you want behavior change in your life, if you are seeking outcomes that you're not currently getting, chances are is because those actions that you desire to take are in conflict with who you believe yourself to be currently. So here's a very simple exercise. It's a 3-step exercise that I'll offer up to you to take away to really kind of unpack what's standing in your way. Step number 1, write down your desired behavior or desired outcome, right? Desired behavior, desired outcome. I want to lose 20 pounds. I want to double my income. I want to complete a marathon. Write down the desired outcome. And then, what is your current identity? Write down what your current identity is. And so take a look at, does that current identity conflict with this desired outcome? If you believe yourself to be not financially savvy or never going to have money and you want to be the guy who doubles his income, then that identity conflict will stand in the way of you getting what you want.
Dominic, I'm going to do this in real time as you're going through the 3 takeaways. We'll make this fast, okay?
Yeah.
Give me step 1 again.
Step 1 is, what is your desired behavior / outcome that you seek?
Got it. I want my body to be flexible and stable so that I can do my woodworking, so that I can be focused while I'm working and everything else. I want my body to be good.
Great. And you haven't had that yet?
No.
Okay. Got it. Your current identity with respect to that is?
Flabby guy. I feel like flabby guy.
Do you have evidence to support that?
I can show it to you right now. Yes.
Yeah. Got it.
Worse than flabby guy, like Cookie Monster, right? Like, I don't even talk about Cookie Monster anymore, but Cookie Monster has led to flabby guy, and here we are.
Right. And actually, I've noticed that the Cookie Monster identity has actually dissolved. We haven't talked about it in a while. You haven't brought that up.
I mentioned that my buddy Andrew was here, who I haven't seen in a long time. He lives out in California, and he brought me a cookie. He's like, here you go, Cookie Monster. I'm like, oh, wait. I haven't told you. Not my identity anymore. I may be flabby guy currently per the proof, but I'm not Cookie Monster anymore. So, okay, here we are, flabby guy.
But that shows you the power of, like, you're no longer Cookie Monster. We haven't even talked about it. And like, you don't receive cookies anymore. It's amazing. Right. Our listeners are sad.
I did eat the cookie, but that's a different story.
Okay. So current identity is flabby guy. Then what is your desired identity around your body?
This is great. It's fit guy. I want to be fit guy. I want to go from flabby guy to fit guy.
Great. What does fit guy do?
Dude, fit guy goes to work out. He allows his body to work in a way that will support itself.
What would be one vote that you could cast for fit guy today?
Some movement every day. Could be gym, could be run, could be yoga, like some sort of movement every day. Got it.
It's that simple. And then, as you start to accumulate those votes and then fit guy becomes more into being, then you may want to ratchet it up.
And Dominic, I want to share this because I'm the reason I wanted to do this at the end of this podcast. This is not something that we had planned on doing, but this is something that I've been going through in our men's group. This is something that came to me as I was like digging into my emotions. I'm like, man, like I feel like a flabby guy. And I used to be fit guy. I used to go to the gym every single day. Like that was part of my identity. And this is why it's really important to not base identity on past results, because I still thought I was fit guy. But then I looked in the mirror and all of a sudden I'm like, I'm not fit guy. There's no evidence. Like I'm not currently fit guy, but I do desire to be fit guy for different reasons these days. But like, I want to be fit guy. And so as soon as I made that declaration with the men's group, like I took that identity on of fit guy. And like, dude, I've been to the gym now. It's been 2 weeks in a row. I've had movement just about every single day. And it's fun. It doesn't feel like before it felt like shame. It felt heavy. Like I got to go to the gym. I'm too flabby. This sucks. And so the power of the identity in this is that fit guy like enjoys going to the gym. Fit guy like wants to go for a run. It's way more fun, and I'm like enjoying it. I enjoy sending you guys goofy photos of me at the gym, like doing it for the first time in a while. Like
we've gotten your videos of you like burning it up on the Peloton, getting all sweaty all over the camera. Yeah, fantastic. I mean we've noticed it. It's been amazing. So that's great, man. Thanks for that dropping it in there. So really, the 3 steps again are: what's your desired outcome or behavior? Step number 2 is what's your current identity? Look for the conflict between those first 2 steps, and then 3, what's that desired identity that you wish to have, and what's the first vote that you can cast in that direction. And one more final reminder, guys, that the registration link to the Masterclass for Design the Next Year of Your Life 2022 edition is live at the top of the show notes. That is again on Wednesday, November 17th from 7 to 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And all of the members of the 3 different Great Man Masterminds will be in attendance. So your opportunity to mix it up with them while also getting 90 minutes of dedicated time to envision the man you want to become in the year ahead and to design the actions that will relentlessly allow you to pursue on a daily basis, bringing that man into being.